Hello everyone, I'm Alan Fisher. On this episode of AZ Illustrated Science, a new book combines art and science to honor a famous science fiction author who inspired a whole generation of kids to make a living studying outer space. And one local hospital is making patients safer by moving around some furniture. The idea sounds simple, but it's getting attention around the globe. We'll explain in a moment, but first, here's a look at the day's top stories.
Arizona Senators John McCain and Jeff Flake introduced legislation today to reimburse states that paid to reopen national parks during last year's government shutdown. Arizona Governor Jan Brewer used state money to reopen the Grand Canyon due to the economic impact on Arizona caused by that park's closure. The bill is sponsored by a bipartisan group of senators from 6 states where national park expenses were covered by those states during the government closure. The Pima County Board of Supervisors passed a resolution today supporting Davis-Monthan Air Force Base. The installation is one of the largest economic engines in Pima County. The Defense Department's budget request last month called for the mothballing of the A-10 aircraft, the main plane flown at Davis-Monthan. The resolution is drawing praise from Senator John McCain. He issued a statement saying the base is, quote, a critically important military installation that keeps America safe. Congress must approve the shutdown of the A-10 program. Last year, the House and Senate refused to do that. The director of the University of Arizona's School of Journalism testified in Congress today about the state of the country's Freedom of Information Act. Dave Collier is also the president of the National Society of Professional Journalists. He told the Senate Judiciary Committee that restrictions to the Freedom of Information Act are getting worse than ever. And that's a look at tonight's headlines.
This weekend, the Tucson Festival of Books Science City will feature a new anthology called Orbiting Ray Bradbury's Mars. The book is a collection of essays on this famous science fiction writer who began his career right here in Tucson at the age of 12. Before we go to that interview and explore some more creative representations of Mars, let's first look at some pictures taken from the high-resolution imaging science experiment, popularly known as HiRISE. These images chronicle the many craters left by meteors striking Mars. This story was produced by Tom Klesby and first aired last year, just after the world was awed by a meteorite strike in Siberia.
The recent event in Russia is an example of one that did mostly explode in the atmosphere, but with some spectacular effects and with some pieces making it to the ground. If that had been Mars' atmosphere that it went through instead of Earth's, it would have made a substantial crater or maybe set cluster of craters.
HiRISE's ability to photograph the same location in succeeding years has led to several discoveries. The appearance of topographical features since the first photograph indicates recent activity, including impact craters and the debris ejected onto the Martian surface.
So we've imaged more than 250 new impact sites. And an interesting thing we find with some of these is exposure of clean ice. The big surprise was just how clean this ice is. We expect, the first order you expect dirty ice. It's mostly ice-filled rock rather than ice itself, but this is mostly ice with very little rock material in it. Now, these are not necessarily all asteroids either. Some of them could be comets.
The camera is expected to capture images of 2 comets that will make close encounters with Mars in the next few years. Each HiRISE picture of Mars' surface contains 1 billion pixels, with each pixel covering about 1 square foot. The approaching comets will be farther away from the camera than Mars is, but will still be photogenic.
So one is called ISON, which is the acronym for the observatory that discovered it. And that is going to pass this year in October, relatively close to Mars, like 10 million kilometers, which means for HiRISE we get 10 kilometers per pixel. So that's probably not good enough to resolve the nucleus, but we can see the near nucleus jets and so forth. And a year later there's another comet that was recently discovered that makes an even closer, much closer pass to Mars. It's actually, there's a lot of uncertainty in it, but the prediction is 50,000 kilometers, which would give us a 50 meter per pixel resolution. We haven't really begun to formulate our plans for this Sighting Springs comet in 2014. We need to learn more about it. Basically, it's like a targeted encounter with a comet that we send spacecraft for, only in this case, it's targeting us.
Much of what HiRise has learned about Mars has nothing to do with asteroids or comets. Recently discovered features grow slowly over weeks, are only active during the warmest times, and are found only in the warmest places. They may be related to one of the most important scientific topics concerning Mars: water.
One area that I've been particularly interested in is something we call recurring slope lineae. Intentionally descriptive only name, but these are seasonal flows with many of them tens or hundreds or even thousands of them on slopes that form seasonally on steep slopes. They grow slowly down the hill slope. And given that behavior and the seasonal temperature dependence, we think that briny water, salty water, is driving this activity. It's a flow of something down these slopes. It's not volcanic. We think it's either flowing water on the surface or seeping water in the shallow subsurface, or some combination of those. But there could also be some sort of a dry flow triggered by water changing state in the subsurface, or something more complicated like that. All we see are these dark lines that move down the slope, and then when they're active, they fade and disappear, and then new ones reappear the following year. And so this is just behavior where that's all we know about them. We're struggling to understand this. But so far, all of the hypotheses involve water in one way or another.
Of course, the comet ISON broke up last November as it passed the Sun. The other comet mentioned in the story, known as Comet Sighting Spring, for the Australian observatory that discovered it, is expected to buzz Mars in October of this year. This weekend, in the Tucson Festival of Books Science City, fans of Ray Bradbury can check out a new collection of essays about this famous science fiction writer called Orbiting Ray Bradbury's Mars: Biographical, Anthropological, Literary, Scientific, and Other Perspectives. Anna Augustowska talked with the book's editor, Gloria McMillan, and with Bill Hartman, who painted the image featured on the book's cover.
Gloria, Bill, thank you very much for joining me tonight. So we are here to talk about the book that basically explores the dimensions of Ray Bradbury's work. What is this book about?
Well, it's not so much a tribute to Ray Bradbury or an homage to Ray Bradbury. It's more exploring the dimensionality of this man. He was not all limited in science or limited in the humanities. He was both. And so we pulled, when our project started, I say we because people helped me so much that it's a we, pulled people from NASA, pulled people from the film critical community, a Native American scholar who looks at him from that anthropology lens, and the literary people who you'd expect. But it's really bringing the arts and sciences together as for no other author that I know of. So that's why it's an exciting book.
So how did you come up with the idea for this book?
Well, I'd been thinking about Ray Bradbury for a long time, and then when he finally died in June of 2012, I thought, this is a time when we should, before people start to really forget and things go away, bring all these sides of this man together. And I was very emotionally, he was not a young man when he died, but I still felt it very strongly when he passed away. And that was the impetus for doing this work, to try to round people up and get them together. And not so much, as I say, to celebrate his life, as to finally make known all the areas that he was involved with. And he recognized no borders. And that's very important to say, recognize none.
Right, Bill. So what about you? What was your role in this project?
Well, Gloria very kindly asked for a cover picture of Mars, which I had done. And I might try to explain what the point of that picture was, which is that I was trying to show what Mars was thought to look like at the time that Bradbury was writing his stories. People may remember that there was this whole idea of canals on Mars and a civilization on Mars, which actually has all sorts of Arizona connections, because Percival Lowell, an astronomer, American astronomer, came out to Arizona in the 1800s, late 1800s, and established an observatory in Lowell, in Flagstaff, Lowell Observatory, and hired a Tucsonan, a colorful Tucsonan, Godfrey Sykes, to go up there and build the dome. Godfrey had never built a dome before. And Lowell, around 1900, he really believed that he was seeing these very straight line features on Mars. And Mars is clearly a kind of a wispy planet. It has linear features, but the whole issue during most of the first half of the 20th century was, are these hard, sharp lines, which would be artificial, or are they kind of wispy features? And it turned out the second idea was correct. These are wind-blown dust streaks. But Lowell thought there were canals built by a civilization on Mars to bring the water from the polar ice caps to the equator on Mars, where all the Martians lived. And so that was kind of the image of Mars at that time. And I painted this picture because I thought, what if when our Mariner 9 spacecraft got to Mars in 1971, and I'm saying that because I was involved in that mission and the camera team, what if when we turned on the camera, this is what we would have seen, these straight line artificial features on Mars? That would have been a totally different world. So it was kind of fun to recreate that image.
So Gloria, tell us, this book basically presents different perspectives of his work, anthropological, there we go. Scientific. Yeah. So tell us about the scientific aspect of this
building
book.
on what Bill has said, Ray Bradbury only had science, and he had an astronomy class in his Hollywood high school. He moved to LA. They actually offered astronomy, and it was all based on the Lowell type of Mars. And so many people read him and they say, he's not accurate. Oh, no. But the point is, he's very poetic, and it's an allegorical tale. So it doesn't matter that he has breathable air and he has water in the canals. That does not matter, because this is a big canvas to do massive allegory and a message, and it's very well done.
And in the 1930s and 40s, when he was publishing, people thought there might be
it
enough air on Mars
so
to be breathable. So that was not that far out.
No, and at the time he first started writing, and as Bill says, publishing these stories, it wasn't so much out of date or that we know better now. Yeah. That came later.
So he inspired a lot of people. So tell us how he inspired you.
Well, it was really interesting for me. I mean, I had read Martian Chronicles, which we were just talking about as a kid. And when I was on the Mariner 9 team, we were invited to produce one of a series of NASA books about our particular mission. What had we discovered? So dry riverbeds on Mars and big volcanoes. The dry riverbeds look just like the Santa Cruz from an airplane. And that's what we saw. So I had this idea, so I volunteered to work on this book. And then I realized that people at the Jet Propulsion Lab were familiar with Ray. And so I got his number and I called him up and asked him, would he write a little preface for the book? And this is just one episode with Ray, but the preface he wrote, very nice, 1 page, beautiful. And he said something to the effect that, if we discover even one paramecium on Mars, this is such a treasure for humanity, and we have to preserve Mars and explore it. Well, the preface was cut by NASA higher-up officials. And what I think is so interesting about this is that it's such a change from 1971 till today, that NASA was so nervous about talking about possible life on Mars, that was so controversial, that the preface was axed. This beautiful Ray Bradbury preface was not in the book as a result of this. But today, the search for Mars, for life on Mars, bacteria or whatever we might find in underground water, underground ice, clays, and so forth that we're discovering on Mars at the Curiosity landing site. Yeah.
Mars Space Rover is named Bradbery, and that's an honor not given to any other literary figure.
That was the name for the place where they landed it.
So what is the audience of this book, and what is the message you aim to deliver with it?
It's about borders and understanding, curiosity, as in the rover, but it's about borders and understanding both different kinds of beings and not taking limits seriously. Someone like Bradbury, who never got to attend college, he was born and grew up during the Depression. He never went to college, but he educated himself in the library, believed that you don't let things stop you. And that's one of the big messages in the book, but also not to take other people's culture away from them. And he believed that eventually the people who'd been colonizing and dispossessing this old culture on Mars, which paralleled Tucson in the Southwest, that's what he was inspired by, that they would eventually start to become Martian. They would take on aspects. So he was always blending, and these divisions are not permanent and they're not hard in cement, and that's beautiful.
Where will we see the book?
We're having a big book launch at the Kuiper Space Sciences building. It's an auditorium room 308, at 2 p.m. on March 15th. And we invite everyone because we are having 2 live Martians come who will be our MCs. We are not having human MCs at this. We are having Martian MCs. So where else can you see that? And that's what I was saying. We're starting a theater of science. And it's another way to bring together the arts and the sciences, and a whole new window we're hoping to open with that.
Just out of curiosity, what is your favorite Bradbury's book?
Martian Chronicles is always up there, although I think actually I like Fahrenheit 451 the best. That is a continuous novel, and it is, a celebration of kind of what Gloria said, preserving cultures that exist. Mm-hmm. And so, of course, the characters are all memorizing books. And this is a future, he visualizes a future where the fire departments are programmed or authorized to go out and burn down houses of people who have book collections, because this is a progressive, futuristic culture, and so we don't want to keep all the old books.
Thank you so much for joining me tonight.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
There were reports today a missing Malaysian jetliner might have veered far off course at the time it disappeared, adding to confusion over what became of the plane and the 239 people on board. Good evening, I'm Gwen Eiffel.
And I'm Judy Woodruff. Also ahead this Tuesday, Crimea took further steps today to plot out its breakup with Ukraine, while parts of Eastern Europe, wary of Moscow's next moves, showed off their military ties to the U.S.
Plus, the brutally cold winter hit the Midwest especially hard. We venture out to witness a rare sight, the Great Lakes encased in ice. Those are just some of the stories we're covering on tonight's PBS NewsHour.
This tax season brings an unhappy surprise, a new penalty for people without health insurance.
The penalty is the maximum of either $95 or 1% of taxable income. For people with higher incomes, it can be much more sizable than $95.
I'm David Green, the bite in the new healthcare law on the next morning edition from NPR News.
This week is Patient Safety Awareness Week. Before we discuss one local project, let's take a look at some historical efforts to protect people's health and safety in this Milestones in Health History. In 1647, colonial Massachusetts passed the first quarantine legislation. The law was designed to protect colonists from diseases like the plague and yellow fever, which were carried to the American colonies aboard ships. In 1863, during the height of the Civil War, President Abraham Lincoln approved a congressional act creating the National Academy of the Sciences, which is charged with providing advice to the nation on matters of science and technology. In 1878, French chemist Louis Pasteur presented a paper on his revolutionary new theory of disease to the French Academy of Medicine in Paris. Pasteur's germ theory hypothesized that microbes are the cause of many diseases. And in 1906, President Theodore Roosevelt signed the Pure Food and Drug Act. This law banned trafficking of mislabeled or adulterated food and drugs and was the first of many government regulations designed to protect the consumer. In an attempt to improve patient safety, the Carondelet Neurological Institute has made some unique changes to its room layout, changes that are getting the attention of medical institutions around the world. Here to explain is Dr. J.C. Cristiano, a neurosurgeon for the Carondelet Neurological Institute. J.C., thanks so much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
Could you tell us a little bit about what patients will see at CNI when they arrive for a procedure?
So what we've done at the CNI is taken a diagnostic CT scanner. That is a very precise way of imaging the body in a 3D sort of a fashion. And we've put it in an operating room. And that allows us to very accurately do different types of procedures where we put in instrumentation or other things in a way that really enhances the patient's outcome and their safety.
And prior to getting that CT scanner in the operating room itself, how would a neurosurgeon deal with for example, a fusion operation in terms of the screws?
So a lumbar fusion in the pre-ICT era, the pre-intraoperative CT era, what we would do is surgeons have a bit of 3D sense to them. It's a bit of an art. And so you would take a two-dimensional image and your direct visualization of the anatomy and based on that sort of triangulate in your mind, sort of decide where you were going to place that screw. One of the best ways to describe this, the analogy that I've used for some of my patients, is it's sort of like when you go ahead and try to put a screw through drywall into a stud. You want to hang something heavy on that. And so you want to make sure that you hit that stud dead on, and you want to make sure the screw doesn't go out one side or the other. We all know the frustration of kind of sticking our drill in the wall and realizing that it's not where we thought it would be. And so this is like trying to do that with 3D X-ray goggles. So you can not only see the stud through the wall, but if you wanted to look at it from an aerial view or even from the side, you could do that too. And so it's just a real accurate way of knowing as the screw is going in where it's going and be able to change your trajectory if you need to.
And JC, how frequently is the CT scanner used in the surgical realm? I mean, is that used every single time?
For all the lumbar fusions that myself and my partners do, yes, we use it every single time. And we use it not only for lumbar fusions, but we use it for cervical fusions and some aspects of brain surgery, including tumor removal, deep brain stimulation for Parkinson's disease, and even aneurysms.
And what other improvements have we seen in the operating room at CNI?
So in addition to that, the ICT is actually linked with what we call a brain lab navigation system. And what that does is it takes that image that we use on the CT scanner and it projects it on our screen. And there's a camera that we can then use to computer model where we're going with our hardware, in the case that you referenced, a screw. And we can even make the screw whatever size we want, so that even if the anatomy is small, say the stud we're measuring for is quite small, which is actually a pedicle in the bone, we can actually test the diameter of that screw going down before we even place it to make sure that it's going to be safe and accurate and end up where we want it to be.
So this is, you're doing it right the first time rather than having to come back and do it again potentially.
That's exactly right. In the pre-operative CT era, what we would do is we would triangulate as best we could using X-ray, and then if our patients were doing well, we might not get a CT scan afterwards, or some of us would even just sort of routinely send them for the exact same thing we have in the operating room, just in a post-operative sense. And so if there was something you didn't like on that CAT scan, then your only option was to take the patient back to the operating room, which is obviously not optimal.
And JC, what are some of the changes or some of the differences we'd see in the actual patient rooms at Carondelet Neurological Institute?
Right. So one of my partners, Eric Sipos, was very instrumental in designing the Carondelet Neurological Institute and the intraoperative CT scanner. And one of the things that we thought heavily about was, how do you make this neurosurgical ICU best for neurosurgeons? In a typical ICU room, you know, the head of the bed is backed up against the wall, and that's where all of the oxygen and connections are. And so to get behind that area, to get access to the head, can be kind of cumbersome. You have to move things out of the way, and some of those things are important, like the ventilator. So what we did is we designed this room in a way to be able to get access to the head. And again, Dr. Sipos was very clever. He put 2 columns on either side of the bed, giving us full access to the head of the bed. This allows things like the EEG machine to be done from behind the patient. There are certain procedures that we do in the ICU, often in a very emergent kind of a fashion, with a patient who's not doing well, to get these devices in and get them in quickly and safely.
The innovations we've discussed, JC, is Carondelet the first to implement these?
So the intraoperative CT scanner that we're talking about, yes, we're the first in the US to do that. And in fact, we were the first in the world to do it the way we did it, which is to take that same CT scanner, and rather than just having it available to 1 room, we have it available to 2 rooms. And the nice thing is that folks from around the US and even internationally have really caught on to this idea. And many of them have come to visit us and learned not only the setup actually itself, but also some of the algorithms, some of the workflow that we've been able to develop in order to get this to work well for patients and do it safely. Some of the folks on that list here in the US are now Mass General, Johns Hopkins, Duke. There are places in as far away as Asia and Germany that have also kind of adapted this same kind of setup.
So they basically looked at what has been successful at Carondelet, and they're replicating that at their facilities.
That's right. And in fact, we actually went over, BrainLab is based out of Munich, Germany. We went over for a few years to visit with them and help guide them on how to, you know, implement these processes in a way that made sense for their market.
And is there any way to quantify how much better patients end up after surgeries in your facility, or is that something that's been tested yet?
Well, we're actually in the process of doing that. We have a couple of research studies going, and one of them is documenting the accuracy with which we place screws and how often we decide to change a screw's trajectory. So we do a CT scan beforehand, and we use our computer navigation to place the screws, and then we do a CT scan afterwards while we're still in the operating room to make sure everything ended up where we wanted it to. And then if we were not satisfied with that, we would then change the position of some of those screws. And you know, the preliminary results are really quite favorable. The system is so accurate that it's unusual, very unusual, for us to change a screw after we place it the first time.
Okay. And JC, we have about 30 seconds left. You're looking at a flawless outcome in most times then?
We're looking, flawless is something we never want to use in medicine, but we're looking at some very, very accurate outcomes at the CNI. And this, we think, not only does it enhance the patient's safety, but it enhances their overall experience. You know, it's a gratifying thing, as you probably know, to be able to go into the operating room, feel safe going in, feel good that your surgery went well coming out, and just get on the way with your recovery.
Okay. And very briefly, about how much did this facility cost, JC?
Well, yeah, I think the number is somewhere around 35 million, but I'm not entirely sure on that.
Well, JC, I want to thank you very much for joining us today.
Oh, my pleasure, Alan.
That's our show. To keep up with the latest news and watch the segments from this and other editions of AZ Illustrated, go to our website, news.azpm.org. I'm Alan Fisher. Thanks for watching.